Hello and welcome to the 2014 online budget town hall with San Francisco Mayor Ed Lee, Supervisor Mark Farrell, and the Mayor's Budget Director Kate Howard. This is the third year that Mayor Lee has hosted an online town hall, and he does it for a very important reason: to enable and engage all San Franciscans to become an active part of his budget process. This is a city of technology, innovation, and social media, so we're really excited to have this online platform to engage the public in a live conversation about their spending priorities. We want the hour to be an inclusive one, so before we begin, I just want to take a few minutes to explain how you can join the conversation with both your comments and your questions. First, you can send an email to Mayor Edwin Lee at sfgov.org, and that's Edwin, not Ed. You could have to include in the subject line, Online Budget Town Hall, so he'll know that that's what this is about. Or you can tweet us at Mayor Ed Lee using the hashtag SFBudget. Finally, you can also post your comments on Mayor Lee's YouTube page. Okay, so let's get started. First, I'd like to introduce San Francisco Mayor Ed Lee, who's going to start our budget conversation today. Mayor Lee.
Thank you, Barbara, and I'm glad to be on here and glad to join Supervisor Mark Farrell, who's chairing the budget at the Board of Supervisors today. As the public knows, generally we have to make an agreement as to this budget, and I'm glad we will be working together. There's a lot of priorities for the city, and I want to explain and take the opportunity to explain some of them. We now have a 2-year budget. We've been implementing a lot of good fiscal discipline in the city, which is why I think there's so much investor confidence in the city that you see all over. There is a lot of construction, there's companies wanting to move in, and we're confident that we can get a budget that will reflect the needs of the city. For me, I'm wanting to make sure that we continue those fiscal disciplines that have kept us as a strong city. So a 2-year budget, 5-year financial planning that we've imposed on ourselves, putting enough money in reserves to get our credit ratings up so that when we ask the public to fund special things, they'd be willing to, because they know we'll be able to complete them and complete them well, just like the SF General Hospital, which is on schedule to be completed very soon, and we're expecting to open it up. Having said that, it's about a $8 billion per year budget. And we are facing, surprisingly for a lot of people, and that has been surprised as we've gone around different parts of the city, that we do have a deficit, about $66 million in the next fiscal year, and the second year, about $133 million deficit. And this is reflective of rising costs in the city. It would be 2 to 3 times more had we not done smart things like pension reform in the past, or gotten some more confidence in our system to put in reserves. So we're looking at probably this year as being a year where we're really transitioning into perhaps future years where we'll enjoy some of the things even more and not have deficit problems to face. But I want a city that is safe, and we continue to be so, and I think a lot of the public understands that at least this first quarter we're looking at some record numbers of less homicides and less violence on our streets. That's a good thing. Our education system is very positive, and we have a school system that is now being more and more praised for what it's doing, and a good part of it is our support for our school system. We have, at this time, before the voters in November, an opportunity to re-up our support for public enrichment, public education enrichment, and children's fund. That would be important, I think, for us to consider. We're also making sure that we have strong infrastructure, and I've been before mayor, head of the capital planning, city administrator, and we have put forward a plan, particularly for transportation, that has a 2030 look that costs the city some $10 billion, and we want to make a good stab at it, if you will, this November with a $500 million bond. But we have other transportation needs that are within the budget, and we're trying to keep it affordable for everyone. part of my budget is to make sure government is affordable as well as other things that are challenging us affordable. I've been very aggressive to try to build more housing and making sure that the budget can reflect support for that, as well as having safe streets. And then I want to make sure that the departments, particularly in the areas of health and human services, can continue to be a strong social safety net for those in need. We are a city not only economically successful, Barbara, but I think we more and more also want to be one of the most compassionate cities that you can find, so that people in need find themselves either loss of a job or disabled or other accidents can actually find help from the city. So having said those very general things, I also want to make sure we know that Kate Howard, our budget director, is here today, and she has the minute details that we're all working on. I will remind everybody that one of the challenges this year is that we have 27 of our labor unions having to renegotiate all of their union contracts. And that is not an easy job. But I will say we came to an agreement with the first one just the other night, and it was by a negotiated agreement. So hopefully that will spell that we're willing to negotiate through agreements with all the other 26 unions. And that's part of the budget as well. And we're going to be reporting that up to the Board of Supervisors as we're challenged with all the other needs from departments and from the communities that are telling us what they think. And this is another great forum for that to happen, so I look forward to the questions being asked.
You've covered so many topics that are really important, and as we get on into this conversation, we're going to be asking you and Kate a lot more detailed questions about them. But now let's go to Supervisor Mark Farrell. Welcome. Very glad that you could join us. Supervisor Farrell is the chair of the Board of Supervisors Budget and Finance Committee, so he's the fellow who's going to be presiding over this entire budget debate when the mayor transmits his budget to the Board of Supervisors. Mark.
Thanks, Barbara, for having me, and thanks to Mayor Lee for your continued leadership, and certainly to Kate Howard, the mayor's budget director, who plays such an integral role in all that we do during our budget process here inside of City Hall. You know, it's an honor and also, again, a great responsibility to be chairing our Budget and Finance Committee, and we are now entering the heart of budget season, if you will, where there are a lot of all-nighters spent inside of City Hall by many people, but it's an incredibly important part of what we do inside of city government. And, you know, from my perspective, what we want to continue to make sure our budget does is strike a balance between near-term needs and long-term planning for San Francisco, that we have a vision of where we want San Francisco to be, not just this year, but 10 years from now and 20 years from now. We want to make sure that it's a budget that positively affects all San Franciscans and really touches everyone's lives in a positive way. And also that our process is very transparent. Part of why Mayor Ed Lee is doing these online town halls year after year, and that we continue to meet with people out in the neighborhoods, is we want to make sure everyone has input in terms of our budget and their voices are heard. And lastly, that we pass a budget that reflects the values of all San Franciscans. And that's such an important part of what we did last year, and that I hope to do this year again. You know, on a personal level, as Mayor Lee mentioned, what we're facing is, despite great economic times in our city, our biggest challenge, those of us who are intimately involved in our budget, is that we're actually facing still a deficit as a city. And we need to make sure that we not only communicate that, but also balance our budget in a very responsible way going forward. On a personal level, you know, I continue to fight for, as does Mayor Lee, issues that affect our economy, making sure that we continue to have a strong economy today and into the future, that we do things that positively affect our quality of life for San Francisco residents, and also make sure that we continue to have a vibrant city. There's so many exciting things happening as a city right now. The Warriors obviously just announced a big project here in town, but we've had a great few years in being part of a very exciting and vibrant city, not only in our neighborhoods, but as a city as a whole. And I think we all share the value that we want that to continue, to make sure San Francisco continues to be a great place to live. So it's an exciting process. It's just the beginning, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Farrell. And finally, we're going to hear from Kate Howard, the mayor's budget director. She's going to give us just a brief overview of the process.
That's right. Thank you, Barbara. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mayor Lee. Thank you, Supervisor Farrell. My name's Kate Howard. I'm the mayor's budget director. And what I'm going to do is briefly talk to you about some some high-level elements of San Francisco's budget. As I think the mayor and the supervisor both indicated, a budget really does reflect the priorities and the values of a city or of a community. It's also a spending plan. Just like in your household, your budget reflects your spending plan for how you're going to spend the money that you have. And then in San Francisco and in all public jurisdictions, a budget is also a legal document. Every year, the city is legally obligated by its charter to balance the budget no later than July 31st. So this year, as the mayor mentioned, we're beginning our next 2-year budget, where we will take all 50 plus of our city's departments and balance the budget for the next 2 years. I have some slides that you'll see coming up on the screen momentarily. So San Francisco's budget is very large. As many of you will remember, San Francisco is both a city and a county. And what that means is that we have all of the responsibilities that a normal county has, things like running a public hospital, operating a jail, having a public defender and a district attorney. And it also means that we have all the responsibilities that a normal city has, things like public safety, such as police and fire or recreation and park services. We do all of those things. And then in San Francisco, we do more than that. We also operate a water system for the region through our Public Utilities Commission. We operate a public transportation system through the MTA. We operate a port, and of course, San Francisco International Airport is part of our budget. So that $7.9 billion, that almost $8 billion, really reflects a broad range of responsibilities that the city has. So moving on to the general fund, when we talk about the city's budget, a lot of what we focus on when we talk about balancing is really about the general fund. And the general fund is essentially the money that is unrestricted. It's money that's not in our enterprise funds for providing services to the public. The general fund represents about half of our overall budget in the city, so about $3.9 billion this year. And the slide that I think is up on the screen shows you that in San Francisco, in the general fund, what we get about, the vast majority of that money comes from the taxpayers. It comes from property taxes, it comes from hotel room taxes, it comes from business taxes. We have a broad base of revenues, but they are all paid for by you. Except we also get about 1 out of every $5 from the state and federal government. And that's really largely because of our role as a county. And that's unusual compared to other cities. Sometimes people ask me, how do we spend our money? And so I think the chart that you see here gives you a high-level summary of that. The easiest way for me to think about it is, of our total budget, we spend about half of our overall expenditures every year on people, on the city's staff. And those are the people that bring you all the services that all of us value. Things like police officers and firefighters, the nurses who work in the hospitals, the people who are producing this event here today. All are valuable public servants who are contributing to the benefits that we all see. We spend the rest of the budget on a variety of other things, including contracts for services and other priorities. Finally, as both the mayor and the supervisor mentioned, we even in these good economic times, the city's revenues are not growing as quickly as our expenditures. And I think it's a hard thing sometimes for people to understand. We are in a time of very favorable economic growth. Just this coming year, we're projecting that the city's revenues in the general fund will grow by more than $160 million. At the same time, though, our expenditures are growing more quickly. And those expenditures are largely driven by the thing we just talked about, by our personnel costs. We have experienced really significant costs in our pensions, as well as our healthcare costs over the last several years, though I think work done by both the supervisor and the mayor, as well as the board more broadly, have made some significant headway to bring those costs down for the long term. Just to put some quick numbers on it, over the next 4 years, we project that our revenues will grow by 7% and our expenditures will grow by 14%. And so the task in front of us, and the task for the mayor and for the board, really is to figure out how do we bring those two things into line over the subsequent 2 years. Thank you so much, Barbara, for having us and also for hosting us today.
Thanks, Kate. And for those of you who are just joining us, this is Mayor Ed Lee's 2014 online budget town hall. With us today are Mayor Lee, of course, Supervisor Mark Farrell, the chair of the Budget Committee, Kate Howard, the mayor's budget director, and I'm Barbara Taylor, the City Hall bureau chief for KCBS Radio. Just quickly again, if you'd like to submit some questions or comments, you can email Mayor Edwin Lee at sfgov.org, include the subject line SF Budget Town Hall or Online Budget Town Hall. You can tweet the mayor at Mayor Ed Lee using the hashtag SF Budget, or you can post some comments on Mayor Lee's YouTube page. Okay, let's begin. And I'm just going to kind of put together some of the things that all of you said and talk first about city workers' salaries and benefits that take up about half of the city budget. And that leads to the greater question of how much discretion, Mayor, when all is said and done. You know, we talk about an $8 billion spending plan, but on a practical level, what you're really dealing with is a much smaller piece of the pie. And how do workers' salaries and benefits fit into that? They very strongly feel that they deserve some good tidings this year after going through the recession and experiencing a lot of pay freezes.
Well, I think one of the nice things about budget season, and there's a lot of things that don't look nice during the budget when we're arguing over priorities, but I do enjoy, having been a veteran of city workforce for over 20 years, is I get a chance to look at what people are doing and what they're asked to do by law, as well as what they want to do to make sure this city is thriving well. And I do enjoy that departments report in and they're telling us what the public is demanding that they do better, whether it's paving the streets better, or more stop signs, more street lights, or making sure there's not flooding in our infrastructure, or these very key things are really helpful in understanding for the public how the city really works. Well, we have a fairly large workforce, as you know, Barbara, over 27,000 employees now, and they're in our hospitals. They're under the ground, they're in our streets, they're driving Muni, they're operating the port, a very active city, and we're a tourist city as well, so we're always trying to invite more groups to come and enjoy our waterfront and all the wonderful things we do and spend money in our hotels. Well, having said that, that workforce has got to be happy, pretty satisfied what they do, and we try to get there. We can't get all of the things that they wish to have, and we have some demands that would cost us in the hundreds of millions of dollars that we don't have. So what we try to do is, one, be honest about what the city's budget is when we are talking to our workforce. And I do believe I am joined with the entire Board of Supervisors to have that honest discussion about what it is that we have to be able to spend. And if we can't keep within those limits, then we've got to cut something. And this is where the difficult tension comes in budget season. And I do enjoy that if workforce leaders understand this budget and understand its limitations, we can have a good conversation about where investments can go that help the workforce get their job done. We've been through hours and hours starting out, and while we only have one to start, I think we're hopeful that because we got it negotiated with our professional engineers, and they're an important part, we can also have the similar positive discussions with everyone else. But there is a large part, and the only unions that are not in discussions this year is police and fire. The public safeties did theirs last year and had a couple of years extension. So we have everyone else who really is the largest part of the workforce. They're in our hospitals, they're in our trenches, and all the other things that we get done.
And so can you just tell us very briefly, what is the contract that you now have a tentative agreement on, and what did they get? What kind of pay raises did those workers get?
Well, I can't go into detail only because I want to respect the union's right to ratify what their negotiating team had.
And what union are you?
And we're talking about Local 21, which is the professional engineers and technology union. They're a very large workforce. They're ones that I had the privilege of working with at DPW because they were our engineers. They were helping make sure our landslides don't occur, our water infrastructure is there. They're a key part of our capital plan because they're involved in literally everybody who's got physical assets to have to be engineered and updated and safeguarded. So we spent a good time, but we're in multiple negotiations all at the same time. And this one was the first to the signal that they wanted to get to, and they represent a lot of craft, backed up by a lot of craft workers and others. Having said that, we both had to compromise. We were holding strong on where we thought it would cost us cuts in other departments. They were holding strong about livability in the city and about the things that they had to give up in the past. And we reached that, and we're going to respect hopefully their rest of their membership having to ratify that. And we're going to report that in detail to the Board of Supervisors so that they know how we're negotiating and what that arrangement is. I do think that the board will be happy that we negotiated this one because we've seen other labor strife in the rest of the Bay Area region that didn't come this way, and we'd like to avoid all of that and treat our workers with respect as we've always done.
The big question, and I think Kate just presented what for me was a surprising statistic, and that's that revenues are only growing half as fast as expenditures, that expenditures are growing at a rate of 14%, revenue at 7%. At the same time, the city, although in better shape than it has been, still has a deficit of over $60 million, and it has to close that. How do you do that? How do you match those things up? And at some point, don't you have to say, we simply can't afford to do A, B, and C, and make some really tough decisions?
Well, that's exactly the conversations that go across the negotiating table, Barbara. And
I'm not just talking about labor unions. I'm talking about programs and services that the city provides.
That's right.
And perhaps, Mark, Farrell, you can jump in here too and say, well, and both of you just talk about how you even approach that seemingly unresolvable problem in a way that leaves people not too dissatisfied.
Well, I think just to go back as well, as you think about, there's so many different ways to slice and dice our budget. And one of them is to look at the buckets of costs, and employees, as have been discussed, are approximately 50% of our cost. It's an important part of what we discuss, during budget negotiations and our labor discussions. For our city employees, as Mayor Lee mentioned, it's very important to make sure that we are respectful and make sure that we treat our city employees fairly, but that we also make sure that we protect ourselves for the future and plan for the future. And the discretion that we have over an $8 billion budget, as Kate Howard mentions so well and broke it down, half of that is not within the general fund, so we really don't have a lot of discretion within that. And then within the $4 billion that we're able to allocate, there are so many set-asides and baselines where we actually have zero discretion over how we spend that. Our true discretionary budget as a city, it's still a really big number. It's a little over $1 billion, but it's a lot less when people hear $8 billion. A lot of times you hear, well, gosh, what about—
You must have money for everything.
What about $5 million for this?
Yeah.
What about $1 million for this? And, the reality is our ability to control what is spent is really significantly smaller than that. It's just over $1 billion. Again, a large amount of money, but within that, we still have to fund so many projects that everybody in San Francisco truly cares about. And so I think it's important to note that our true discretion, what we really do have a discussion about during budget season, is actually a much smaller amount, and our ability to control that is very important, though. And so that's where all these intense negotiations come from.
Also, I think it's been very helpful, and this is what the board and our office has done over the years, is go from something that was so high pressured when we had a year-to-year budget to a 2-year budgeting plan with 5-year financial planning. When I've gone out to the neighborhoods, and I'll be out to Supervisor Farrell's district very soon with coffees with people that he really has been coming at him to see how we can all work together, they've been appreciative, the residents have been appreciative that they may not get it this year, something that they want, because it won't fit or we don't have the priorities adjusted to what they need. But there is an appreciation that we can look 2 years down the road and say, we'll fit it in there when we have the other things that perhaps need to be done before we get there. That allows for us to have a conversation that's very inclusive. And perhaps even now we're stretching it to even 3-year outlooks. In fact, I think that was part of the negotiations in Local 21. We didn't restrict ourselves to just the next year. And I think this allows people to say, okay, you're still caring about us, about our needs. We can't get it this year, but we're going to fit it in 2 or 3 years down the road. I think that allows for people to say we're still part of it. We're not high pressured into the next year about trying to get everything that we think we need. And by the way, some of the things that we want to do does take multiple years to get done, whether it's infrastructure, transportation, building a new park, or opening a new library. Those are things that are invaluable to the community, but they just want to be included. And I think that basic sense that government is listening to us, that we're engaging with them, and that we'll respond at some time with things that they might feel are immediate, but as we talk through it, they can see it phased in. I think people appreciate at least that.
You know, there's a number of things coming up on the ballot that are going to impact the budget. We have an earthquake bond coming up. We have a couple of transportation measures to generate more money for the MTA and Muni. We have a possible minimum wage measure going on the ballot that's going to impact the city as a whole and city government in general. So let me pose this question that someone tweeted a couple of minutes ago, the first tweet we got, and it's an interesting one. Some might say it's the voice of the silent majority out there who likes to drive. I'd like to be able to support bonds for replacing and expanding Muni buses, trains, new subways, street paving, and parking. But as a driver who is over the city's anti-car policy, I'll never vote for a bond or tax that even potentially could include more anti-car measures. I hope you recognize how strongly drivers feel about this. Separating the bonds is the only way I can see Muni get funding. You recognized this in your State of the City earlier this year when you said it's time to get rid of those Sunday parking meters. We've got to give motorists a little break here too, or we're going to have a revolt.
Certainly. Well, the larger backdrop is that almost a year ago we put together a task force to study our transportation needs, and they worked really hard. We had experts from all the different parts of transportation, people that advocate for walking, for bicycling, for automobile and roadways, for municipal transportation in all different modes. And they said that we've got to have some $10 billion plus in the next 15 years to meet all these needs, also with a growing population. Having said that, we're tackling that with a $500 million bond this November that will not raise property taxes, by the way. It still keeps this very good conversation with property owners in the city. Something that I was very proud with the Board of Supervisors to have adopted some years ago is our 10-year capital plan does not raise any more. But when we do finish projects, then we will use that finished gap to put something else in that we need. And this is how we're doing general obligation bonds in the city. But I also said that we've got to have a better conversation with people because the pressures of everyday transportation in the city are tense. And the roadways are being shared by so many modes. And I kind of felt, why are we nickel and diming people on Sundays? And you know, the hurt is not so much paying the meters. It's that $75 hit when you get a citation for having been crossed that meter time by a few minutes on a Sunday, when people are least expecting it and they're trying to just feel a little bit more ease on that weekend. And try to have a more positive conversation with our public that if we stop nickel and diming you on those Sunday meters, would you help us with this bond that doesn't increase your property taxes? Everywhere I've gone, Barbara, they've indicated a very positive thing that, and I'm not taking sides on the car versus non-car on this, I'm just kind of suggesting that we can have a better conversation with the public in general about our transportation needs if we don't have these other things that really irk people, these things that are relatively financially small, but they just say we're not feeling you, and I want people to be clear-minded in support of this transportation bond, because it's incredibly important to the municipal railway, to all the pedestrian safety projects that we want to happen within that $500 million, to the additional roadways, the designs of our streets. This is how it's important, and it reaches literally every district of the city will get to be touched by this bond, and eventually by the $10 billion of investment we want the public to make.
Hey, so another tweet that just came in, and this is kind of right up your alley, Supervisor Farrell. Why does San Francisco have so much inefficiency in muni and homeless spending? More accountability for results, not more money. You've been conducting a series of hearings on homeless spending. There was a recent article in the Chronicle that said the city spends more on homeless programs than it does on children, youth, and families, on all of the public works projects, on recreation and parks. Is there a lot of inefficiency? Are there programs that we need to reorganize or redirect? And is this the budget to do it?
You know, I think that no matter what organization you're part of, whether it's a city government or a company or any other organization, there's always room for efficiency, and we are not immune from that as a city government at all. And so I think, as certainly as elected officials and as people that are really playing an important role in our budget, we need to always search for ways to be more efficient as a city government. That's a never-ending story, if you will, from a city perspective, and I think it's a big responsibility that we have at all times, in good economic times and bad times. You know, whether it relates to buckets of spending, whether it be homelessness or MTA. From my perspective, what we're doing with the homeless in particular is taking a hard look at how we're spending the dollars that we are spending. Because, there's a large sentiment that says if we didn't spend that amount of money, our homeless problem would be worse. And so the reality is, from a city government perspective, if you value things as a priority, you have to spend money to address those. And you want to do it in an efficient way, in an effective way, and make sure the public understands how you're doing it. And that's what we're trying to highlight. But I believe that's important to highlight across all departments, no matter where we spend our buckets of money. And let me also add, too, in terms of the comment about from the tweet from the driver. Look, my family, I drive during the week because I take my children to school in the morning. And that makes me use my car. On the weekends, we use our bikes. We walk quite a bit. So I feel like our family uses all modes of transportation. And I understand the comment. I think this bond, the general obligation bond, is very important as a city. But I do think, from my perspective, we need to do a better job as a city government talking about it is a zero-sum game of drivers versus bicyclists versus pedestrians. We're all in this together. And we need to have a conversation about sharing our roadways together and how we can do it on a more really safer going forward. And we need to make sure that we talk about that as a shared roadway, and make sure that we don't have certain segments, drivers in particular, feel that they're being attacked or feel like we're not doing anything for them. We need to be in this all together. And I think, as Mayor Lee mentioned, that's the conversation we need to start having going forward, because I don't think that dialogue is healthy. And I think we need to change that going forward.
Just a follow-up question on homeless spending. You said there's a school of thought that if we weren't providing these programs, spending this amount of money, that the problem would be even worse. Even more people would be on the streets. There's also the opposite argument, that if you provide the money, you'll end up with a greater homeless population, attract people who get homeless services. And I remember when Ed Riskin, who now runs the Municipal Transportation Agency, was the head of Public Works, and his solution to the litter problem was to remove trash cans. I never quite got that counterintuitive thought, but that's what happened. I'm not sure what the outcome is. But Mayor Lee, could you just kind of talk about where you come down on just this general idea of, do you use more money, do you use less money? What's the right fit to most efficiently address the problem?
I think I joined with Supervisor Farrell. We have to think of smart money, not more, not less, but how do we use what we do in a smart way? And when we look at the data, and the data tells us a lot, Los Angeles had an increase in their homeless population, almost double digit. So did New York. We did not. We held steady because of our strong message that we wanted to build housing with supportive services on site, just like we did with the Rene Casanava project the other day, 120 units, where on-site services for formerly homeless, and you should see the smiles on people's faces. That's our true belief. That's where all of our programs has been directed towards. Having said that, we are looking for better outcomes. Yes, we are dissatisfied when time and time again the very same individuals we're offering shelter and services come back through the same loop. What are we doing about that? And this is what I think Supervisor Farrell and I have significant hours of conversation on with our health department, with the human services department. How can we humanly focus on those 500 or 600 people and do better and have a better outcome? And this is a conversation that has to incorporate our judicial system, our criminal justice system, but our health system as well. We've got to have better answers, and we believe that we can find it in the near future. And then the smart money will head in that direction, not just more of the same that perhaps might end up just increasing the population rather than decreasing it in a humane way.
There's a question that came in that's basically, how do you prioritize what you spend money on, what different services, and it was a question that I had as well when I was preparing for this. You know, we have all of these issues: public safety, health care, affordable housing, education, helping the homeless. I could probably spend the whole hour listing all of the different needs. Could you just talk about, not philosophically, but specifically, you know, when someone wants you to hire a new police officer and someone else wants you to hire a new gardener, and realistically, you've only got money to do one of you can't do it. How do you just nuts and bolts make that decision? Is it political pressure? Is it what? I mean, how does it happen?
Well, I hope it's less political pressure and more the agreement with the board about what the performance is. I think when we present the budget and the board has time to review it, we call up all these departments and they're asked, and they have to have the data and they have to prove that the money we gave them last year, did they spend it properly? Did we get results, positive? Did we get the roads fixed? Did what you promised in that get done? Did we have some outcomes that we could be proud of? Because that's ultimately what I think our public is demanding, is that we have positive outcomes on this. And this is where sometimes the reality hits where the priorities are, is we're gonna continue trying to be a successful city if we get the outcomes where we put the money in. And where there is not positive outcome, then we'll go to other priorities.
You know, I think it's a little easier for the mayor's office to insulate itself from political pressure, but over at the Board of Supervisors, it's the Wild West. I mean, there's a demonstration every day, at least every week, by all of these different interest groups, mostly about money, mostly at budget time. So we have homeless activists protesting. We've had SEIU 1021 protests all over the city demanding various things in the budget. We've had the Twitter, Google bus controversies. And I'm just suspecting, when I look back when Mayor Willie Brown was in office and he tried to shut down critical mass, then and now, what critical mass wanted, and they were relentless in their last Friday of the month protests around the city. What we have today are bike lanes that we didn't have before. We have all of this pedestrian safety and bicycle safety that we didn't have. So I guess that's a long way of saying, how much is the Board of Supervisors influenced when it gets the budget by all of these interest groups?
My hope is that we're influenced by true policy priorities as a city government, and no elected officials. The Board of Supervisors, certainly, I know the mayor's office is not immune from people advocating for certain budget priorities, for protesting against certain things that they don't believe in. And you know, it is great that we're developing a greater public transportation infrastructure as a city, bike lanes included. I wouldn't necessarily attribute it to critical mass, if you will. But you know what? That's part of our democratic process as we go through budget times, and people voice their concerns and their priorities, and that's part of the discussion that we have as a city. And backing on to what Mayor Ed Lee said, we have to look at all the things that the public and San Francisco residents demand of us as a city government and expect us to provide. And some of those things are invisible. The people that are digging, actually you can see them digging up the roads, but they don't really.
They're not invisible at all.
You're right, they're not invisible. But, it's a lot different to pay for someone to dig up streets than it is to pay people to, work for our park and rec system that provide programs for our youth, things that really impact in a positive way our daily lives. And so we need to make sure that as city government, we do everything that we're tasked with. And it's ultimately priorities at the end of the day, and it's ultimately a balancing act. And there's never really a bad priority, but again, I know Mayor Lee and Kate Howard shares this sentiment that we need to be responsible about planning for today and for the future as well. And as Mayor Lee talks about all the time, this is about making sure that people feel confident in our city, not just today, but into the future. And as a parent of 3 small children, I want San Francisco to be healthy 30 years from now. Not just today. And so it's balancing those priorities, and I think we're doing a great job of that. But you know what? It's an interesting process, if you will, and it gets heated at times, but that's what it's all about, and that's why we have budget season here in City Hall.
And let me just give you another example. Just over the past couple of weeks, there's been a lot of pressure, and I think even legislation at the Board of Supervisors to increase the dedicated amount of money in the general fund for children, youth, and family programs, to increase, I think, from 3 to 5% of general fund spending, which is a fair amount. Is this the budget year to do that, or is there any budget year to do that? I mean, there's generally the issue about discretionary funding and whether that's a good idea, but specifically, does this program rise to the level of something that should have more funding year after year?
Well, I think my approach is listening to that. I think we have to break it down. What is it that is reflective in that request for an increase? Because that increase is not just for 1 or 2 years. It's going to be a carve out, an increase of a set aside that will be at least 10 to 15 to even 20 years. So it's a big deal. And we have to be very careful when we're looking at that, because the impact of it is not just the great feeling that we're going to support kids. I get that, and I want that feeling as well as anybody else. What do we potentially impact by that increase? And in the charter, an increase in one of the set-asides means a decrease in the other set-asides. And within that charter, there are set-asides for libraries and for transportation. So there is a critical discussion that has to happen here, not just a feel-good, we got to support our kids and children and families going. That's something I would love to do. But the really specific thing is, okay, if you increase there, where do we have to cut? Because it's a finite pie. It is not a growing pie. I do want to look at specifically what it is that we can do to assist the growth that we have with families in the city. We have alternative viewpoints about what's going on there, and we need to, I think, support things that might help us in the future, but not necessarily without the consequences being handled as well.
So it sounds as though you would be leaning against increasing the set-aside.
Well, I'm trying not to say for or against. I'm just saying that our assessment has to be, we're willing to take the cuts in other places in order to support this. That's the conversation that I must have with the Board of Supervisors, and this is where we've got to have some agreement on.
So you're a dad. How do you feel about that, and a member of the Board of Supervisors that's going to be taking up this very issue?
Obviously, as Mayor Lee mentioned, for me, spending money on children's priorities is, it's a given. I think we need to be doing that as a city. I talk about it all the time. We have the lowest percentage of children in our city of any major city in the United States, and we need to do a better job. But as we look at this, for instance, spending increase potential, it's in the context of the entire budget. It's in the context of what else are we giving up if we do that. I'm open to that discussion, as I believe Mayor Lee is, but we want to have a wholesome discussion. You can't be a bull in a china shop and say we're going to spend money on everything and then realize you have nothing left at the end just because you had a few priorities you wanted to take care of. It's in relation to everything else we spend money on as a city. We want to make sure we continue to hire more police officers as a city. We want to make sure there are gardeners in our parks. So it's all together in the budget process from my perspective. And it's going to be a conversation we'll be having over the next few months. But it needs to be wrapped up, as are all of these other great priorities that we have as a city, needs to be wrapped up in one wholesome discussion, not taken individually.
Mayor, in your State of the City in January, you talked about the importance of raising the minimum wage, but you've kind of hedged on what that amount should be, and now there's a $15 an hour proposal out there. Is that something that you support, and how would that impact the city budget?
I definitely support an increase in minimum wage. I signaled that was part of the affordability agenda for the city. Low wage earners cannot survive in the city at $10.74 an hour. I think there's general consensus that that's true. But then how do you not hurt job creation? That's another part of my priorities in discussions with not only the board, but with businesses and communities. How do you make sure youth are not negatively impacted or that certain parts of our business sectors are not hurt so badly that they can't recover? So these are more delicate discussions that have to have inclusive thoughts from them reviewed by economic experts. So I was reluctant to call out a number and then challenge everybody to meet it, so much as call out the need to go in that direction and invite everybody to tell us, okay, what is the right numbers? What is perhaps the phased ways we can do this that help low-wage earners survive better in this city and give them some hope and afford things? And at the same time, have those conversations with small businesses, with medium-sized businesses, with other sectors of industry in our city that we value, that are job creators, job sustainers in the city. How do we do it in ways in which it doesn't hurt them? There is a huge amount of people employed by nonprofits. Have we had a conversation with them about how increasing the minimum wage helps or hurts their operation? I would hate to see critical nonprofits say, that's the last straw. We're going to have to close down. We can't even provide the service you pay for in the city because you're telling us to increase the wages, but are you going to pay us to do that as city contractors? There's those delicate conversations. We have to have those before we announce a wage or a series of wages that would get to something more affordable.
Let me just call out that number, though, the $15 an hour. Do you think that's doable?
Well, I think that's only doable if you do it in certain ways that reflect not hurting businesses.
And how would that be?
Well, that's what's going on right now, Barbara. It's those delicate conversations with all the different business sectors. Because I'm getting a lot of emails saying, if you just thrust the $15 an hour next year on me, I'm gone. I'm closing. Or I've got to cut. Or I've got to raise prices, and I'm going to be less competitive. There's a lot of comments about that. There's a lot of comments about, why aren't we doing it statewide? Why is it just San Francisco? We're competing against all the other businesses in the region. And yet, I think for me and my sentiment with the Board of Supervisors as well is they want us to have those delicate conversations. That's always been about making sure our economy is very positive. And if you just thrust things on business like that, and then they have to react in ways in which we can't anticipate, and we want to anticipate as much as we can, then you're talking about shocks to the economy that I think are bad ways to do business as a city, but also as a city that's trying to have better relationships with its business so we can hire more local residents, more low-income kids, grow our economy in the right way, in a predictable way. Business and job creators, including city departments, I think the key thing is predictability rather than shocks to the system.
So there's a trio, as I see it, of three interconnected issues. There's affordability, which we talk about often in the context of housing, but it's not just housing. That's a big one. There's jobs, good paying jobs, and there's the minimum wage and how that helps people in San Francisco with the affordability issue. How interrelated do you see that? I mean, you've talked so much about affordable housing. You have too, Supervisor Farrell. How do you make housing affordable without increasing people's salaries?
Well, I would just say one comment. As we talk about the minimum wage, or we talk about other things we're doing as a city, I believe Mayor Lee's approach is exactly the right one to do, is we need to have a wholesome conversation. Issues like this don't lend itself to political bullying at the ballot. That to me is exactly the wrong approach. If we're doing something that is going to affect our small business community and our large business community, we need to have a dialogue, an active dialogue with them. I too support increasing the minimum wage, but I support also making sure everyone's at the table to discuss how it will impact them. Do we have separate levels for small businesses? Should that impact small businesses that have 5 employees the same as a business that has 1,000? Those are the type of conversations we absolutely need to have. And it's that approach that takes a while to come up with what the ultimate solution is. But I think that is absolutely the right approach, especially as Mayor Lee mentioned, we want to make sure for our employers here inside of San Francisco that we give them certainty and they're a voice in the process. Because without them, we wouldn't have the economic growth that we do as a city. And so it's really important to have a process around it. And it's a complicated issue. How it affects youth employment, how it affects small businesses, people that have get tips as a big part of their wages. It's a very complicated issue, and we need to make sure that we have a process around that. And I think it's the right thing to do.
Hey, I just want to remind the people who are tuning in today that this is the 2014 online budget town hall hosted by San Francisco Mayor Ed Lee, also with Supervisor Mark Farrell and the Mayor's Budget Director, Kate Howard. I'm Barbara Taylor with KCBS Radio, and we've just got a couple of minutes left, so I'm just going to give you the tweet if you want to tweet us something. Mayor Ed Lee, using the hashtag SFBudget. You can also email the mayor at mayoredwinlee@sfgov.org. I know you wanted to jump in, Mayor, so let me go back to you real quick.
You're going to key me in on something that I'm very excited about, and it's housing. Housing is a
that
great
was the next thing I was going to ask about.
Of the cost of living here in the city, and it is. Everybody agrees it's so expensive. Every day there's another story about someone either moving out or being evicted, or you turn your head around how much it costs. Housing is very complex, and it's complex to find solutions. Having been a housing activist in my previous life, I know a little bit about it, and I know that building housing that we have not done in past decades, building housing is one of the great keys. And that's why you'll see me celebrating housing being built in San Francisco along transit corridors and places where our planning department has guided us with our transportation areas where we can provide more density. And then figuring out how to make that housing affordable to working families in the city is a huge challenge. And we're going to get there. And I've put out a pretty aggressive 30,000 homes to be built by 2020. That means 5,000 to 6,000 a year, each year, until that 2020 is done. That's the building part. And I believe we're going to get there. I believe we've got enough inertia, enough land identified and so forth. But building is only one aspect. Because what if we built and then the same number disappeared for different reasons that we didn't pay attention to? I'm a big, strong supporter of our rent-controlled units. And that is why I joined with Senator Mark Leno up in Sacramento to reform the Ellis Act so that you don't have speculators coming in here and wiping out whole buildings of affordable units for people. So that's going to hopefully get some traction. I'm also wanting to make sure that we work with our departments to find all the lands that are available that are within our control that can be used to build housing, because guess what? The biggest cost in building affordable housing is the land cost itself. And And we've got, for example, 16th and Mission now. Finally, the school district was able to make an agreement with us. And that's just one of many parcels that people and entities have held on to that we are now identifying through kind of a land banking effort that we're trying to get. I'm asking banks and corporations to come in and assist us with land banking opportunities that buy down the cost of land so we can build housing that's affordable working families. And then we joined with Supervisor Farrell very strongly on the down payment assistance program that targeted people that we really want and need to live in the city. And that's something I'm going to let him talk a little bit about, but I'm excited to work with him on it because guess what? Every time we've done it, it's been used up immediately, and it just reflects the strong interest that people want to actually be here in the city and serve the populations that they serve.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I apologize to those of you who sent in questions and we weren't able to get to them. You can still submit questions, and hopefully someone in the mayor's office will respond to you. Just as we close very quickly in less than a minute, Supervisor Farrell, do you have any final thoughts?
I think the one thing that I want to make sure everyone, the public knows as well, is that, you know, as a city of San Francisco, we have done a lot to protect ourselves in the future financially as a city. You know, as you look at the two legs of a long-term stool for municipalities across our country, it's pension and retiree healthcare obligations. And through Proposition C in 2011 and Proposition A last year, we are now the only city in the United States that have passed both pension reform and retiree healthcare reform at the ballot. That's something very much to be proud of, and to know that our city government, again, is focused not just on the today, but the tomorrow, and having a vision of the future of San Francisco, and making sure we're on really solid footing going forward. I think it's really important to know, in large part due to those moves, we have the highest credit rating we've ever had as a city. And it's really important to note, as you think about our budget and our long-term financial picture, that we've already done a lot as a city. We're going to keep working on it. But it's important to know that, I think for our residents to know that we are continuing to look at the future as well.
Thank you very much. Mayor Lee, your final comments?
You know, we're the innovation capital of the world, and I'm proud and humbled to be the mayor and to have the privilege of working with the Board of Supervisors to figure out all these things. I hope our audience, through this show and all the meetings that we have, understand and appreciate the complexities that we're faced with. And I will work hard every day with the board to make sure we deal with those complexities with the ultimate outcome of being an even more successful city, a compassionate city, a city that welcomes everyone, but also figures out solution-oriented innovation is what our city should be remembered for everything that we do. And to accommodate a great infrastructure, a city that works for everybody and appreciates all the diversity that is our strength.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you who participated in today's online budget town hall. Supervisor Farrell, Mayor Lee, Budget Director Kate Howard, and most of all you, the public. We hope that we have been able to answer some of your questions, and please stay involved in this budget process. There's going to be lots more opportunities in different neighborhoods all around the city. I'm Barbara Taylor with KCBS Radio, and again, thanks so much for joining us.